Good morning. You all are stuck with just me today, so no big show. We had a little bit of a different plan, but did a pro forma unexpectedly in the schedule, and so some folks were able to do some district work today instead. So next week we'll have a few other folks joining us. Before I jump into the sort of substance of the week, I did want to take just a quick moment because I think it really matters for all Marylanders and frankly for everyone in the country, the state of affairs. If we think about where we started this week, it was with news in the early morning of an individual who was trying to commit a domestic terrorist act in the Baltimore area with an assault rifle, and thankfully the search or the attempt to acquire that assault rifle is what led ultimately to the downfall of this plot. But it was an individual who was seeking to attack the Baltimore region for anti-Semitic, hatred-based purposes, working with somebody in Florida. And then we get to the end of the week, and last night, I'm sure everybody was following the unbelievable situation of what had happened in Baltimore County. Thank God it appears that the law enforcement officers who were injured yesterday and last evening, at least one of them I believe has been released. I've not heard the most recent update on the other. But those who were trying to protect the community and were attacked by an individual with an assault rifle. The costs are not just the pain and suffering of those two officers from the experience yesterday in Baltimore and Harford counties. The cost was an entire 6 schools were shut down for a day. The thousands of kids that were impacted, the thousands of families that now had to think about the trauma that was inflicted about who could be running through their backyard with a firearm, with an assault rifle, because no one knew what was happening. And thank goodness, and I really want to give thanks to the law enforcement officials, to the county executives, to those in the executive agencies that did the hard work of trying to track down what happened. And I'm sure there will be more details that come out over time. But to start the week with a domestic terrorist attack, to end the week in Baltimore County and Harford County with an individual with access to a firearm that shoots 2 law enforcement officers, we have a problem. We have a massive, massive problem. It's a problem here in the state of Maryland, and it's a problem in the country. And as a father, as a son, as someone that cares about this state and this world, something has to give. This can't keep happening. And we see it in other parts of the state, in other ways. The gun violence that is plaguing this country is unacceptable. And I simply, we're going to do the best we can at a state level to provide as much protections as may be feasible. But there is a fundamental question that we have to ask ourselves, and it is whether or not more guns make us safer. And if that's the answer, it's just very difficult for me to see or understand, because what happened on Monday and what happened in Baltimore and Harford counties and what we've experienced in too many communities with neighborhood gun violence, more guns will never be the answer to keeping us safer. It just won't be. It increases the chances of guns getting lost. It increases the chances of guns getting stolen. It increases the chances of guns getting into the hands of people who are not capable of making life or death decisions. And it's a horrific situation that doesn't have a single answer. But I just would be remiss if I didn't start kind of on my reflection of what we've all experienced this past week. We cannot get numb to what's happening around us, and something has to give. So that's my, that's what's keeping me up right now. We have lots of bills. We've got 857 bills. But at the end of the day, we've had this conversation before. If people don't feel safe, if they don't feel like they have access to support, we're never going to be a society that can truly prosper. And so we've got to figure out a better resolution. In terms of session, let me pivot slightly. We've had a busier week this week. It's certainly been a committee-heavy week. That we're in full swing. I think we'll start to be in a more regular rhythm next week. We are dealing with the governor's nominees, secretary nominees. So we had 9 that we heard this week. We'll probably confirm all of them unless there's some surprise on Monday evening session. We'll hear the remaining named secretaries on Monday during the Executive Nominations Committee, and we'll certainly see where things go with each of those nominees and all of the other appointees that we have available. The budget is in full swing. We are going through, subcommittees are working very diligently to go through item by item. And finally, want to just note that we'll have the green bag next Friday. So all of the hundreds of nominees and all of the hundreds of vacancies that exist in state government, the green bag, which is what the executive will put forward, the nominees for boards, commissions, and other appointed areas. So it's going to be a busy week next week as well. So with that, let me pause and open it up for questions.
Since you brought it up, there are numerous new gun bills introduced in the Senate in particular. They have to do with tougher penalties, but there still doesn't seem an appetite to go in that direction.
You know, penalties, I think there is a conversation about it without a doubt. You know, I think that the Senate certainly is, I think we'll see something move around penalties, particularly balancing between those who are minors and those who are above the age of 21. At the end of the day, the penalties only matter if there are arrests and convictions. And so, you know, my hope is that if we're only solving this problem with penalties, I think we will have failed, because it means somebody's been hurt. It means there's more illegal guns in the commerce stream, and it means that there are more arrests for more guns in the community. So, you know, is it a part of the story? Yes. Will it solve the gun violence that is plaguing our state? No.
On that track, I believe Chair Clippinger dropped his gun safety bill in the hopper during Vice Chair Waldstreicher's hearing the other day, and his bill encompasses a couple of policies tackled by the multiple bills that Senator Waldstreicher is sponsoring. Has there been conversation between the House and the Senate about how to come to like some kind of happy medium, how to negotiate that? Not yet, but there will. You know, I had a chance to quickly review Chairman Clippinger's bill. There's a lot of really interesting and good ideas in there as well. And so the draft amendments to Vice Chair Waldstreicher's bill also have some very, very, very good ways to move forward. So I think this is where the beauty of the legislative process will be in full swing. I think that we'll take the best of both chambers and find a way forward. You know, I think that there's no exclusive chamber with the best idea, and so this is a new framework for the state of Maryland and for the country because of the Bruen decision. And so I think all of us are trying to figure out what makes the most sense in the new legal framework.
Senate Bill 221, sought by the judiciary, allows judges and family members to have their addresses and phone numbers removed from the internet. And are there, if you're aware, are there that many threats against judges? Is it growing? And there's also talk about adding law enforcement to that. What about lawmakers? I mean, it just seems a little bit of an overreach. And if you're familiar with it, I'd like your take on.
Their home addresses. Is that?
Yes.
You know, the sad reality here is that the number of articulated threats and intensity of threats against public officials has increased. This goes to the level of school board members. And certainly we saw some instances of a great deal of hostility. You know, I think this is, when we talk about the session priority being mental health and being one of the top 3 things for not just the session, but for the term, we as a society are not okay. And we need to figure out how we move forward together. In the meantime, there have been increased threats, and you know, it is a reality of the world right now. I just was reading an article about the congresswoman, I believe it was in D.C., who was attacked in her hotel. There was an incident, I believe, in New Jersey of a council person that was slain at his workplace. Whether or not it was related, I don't know enough whether or not it was related specifically to their duties as elected officials. I do know that here in the state of Maryland, there have been increased threats. You know, the degree to, thank goodness we've not seen those manifest. And, you know, it's always a tough question whether or not somebody is just blowing off steam or whether there is a realistic plot to do something. You know, you look at things like what happened on Monday and the arrest. This was a woman in the Baltimore region who certainly had a lot of hate in her heart and sought to do a great deal of damage no matter whomever would be impacted. I don't think that elected officials or judges are special in any way. I don't think that they deserve a special privilege. I do think that there is a nature, just like the law treats public officials as public figures. There is just an increased likelihood of people knowing who they are and where they may go, and so I think there's always a concern about the elected officials and from my perspective, and families as well, because a lot of times those of us who run for the office, we know what we're getting into, the family members don't. And so I think homes are always off limits, should never be something that is contemplated as a place of demonstration. In a democracy, going to somebody's home is a choice to intimidate and instill fear. And I think it's just not the appropriate venue in which to enact change.
Sure. Thank you. Quick question regarding Senate Bill 540 in regards to the civil rights enforcement power of the Attorney General. Why is that important for you to put through, and what's the value of that civil rights enforcement?
This is the patterns and practice. Is that the civil rights enforcement bill?
Yes.
I've had a lot of good conversations with the Attorney General on this. This is one of his top priorities. We have the Office of Civil Rights, which has done really great work over time. The challenge has been that there are instances in industries where we have seen continuous practices, and be it through mortgage lending or in check cashing businesses, where we've seen consistent patterns of discriminatory behavior. And right now, the Attorney General has very limited tools. Most people think that the Attorney General has this authority already, but unfortunately, that's not the case. And in fact, the Maryland's Attorney General has a very limited scope, and so we're going to have a very robust conversation about what is the right scope and where are places where the Attorney General can be proactive in trying to reduce discrimination in our industries and marketplaces. And frankly, it's good for commerce for the Attorney General to have these types of powers, because what we know is that discrimination in the marketplace is bad for everyone. It in fact causes distortions in the marketplace that are bad for not just those who are getting discriminated against, but for all of those in the marketplace as well. And so, it's an important initiative that we get right.
Mr. President, I want to go back to to Dave's line of questioning related to addresses. Would you agree, disagree that there is a legitimate public interest in knowing the addresses and property holdings of public figures in terms of conflicts of interest, especially as it applies to financial conflicts of interest? And the Ethics Commission, because the legislature several years ago voted to change the law, already requires ethics to redact home addresses, which means that the public in some ways doesn't have that information to be able to assess whether or not particular conflicts exist.
I would agree that having transparency around an individual's ownership interests are important for assessing conflict of interest, full stop. I do think that's different than the available access overall of where somebody lives and is at home and domiciled. And so there's an important balance there, and so I think it's about crafting the right balance between those two priorities.
What does that balance look like in your mind?
I mean, I think that there is a reasonable disclosure, that there is there's a process for requesting the information and understanding why that information is being sought. In our annual ethics forms, that is, we report all of our owned interests, or all of our ownership.
That information is redacted.
The address is redacted, but there is notification of what interests are generally held. The home address is redacted. I don't believe that property ownership that is not somebody's home is redacted. I'd have to double check. So.
I think you're correct, but still, the inability to know where a particular property is might hamper someone might hamper the public in fully understanding whether or not a conflict or an appearance of a conflict exists.
I think it's a valuable, if there is a method for somebody to be able to validate where it is. Look, this is the tough balance of where we are today as a society with information available on the internet everywhere. I'm very cautious about where I believe my address might be, but certainly feel absolutely not only obligated, but it's the right thing to do to have it in my ethics form so that somebody can see it as requested. And so, I just think it's a tough balance that we'll have to work through as a legislature.
Mr. President, soon 80,000 people will no longer qualify for Medicaid coverage. Is there a plan in place to reach out to those individuals and to help them get into something else?
Yeah, the health secretary has been very forward about this. She has made this one of her top priorities in conversations that I've had with her, and it was mentioned again during the executive nominations hearing on Monday. Dr. Herrera Scott, Acting Secretary Herrera Scott, is very aware of not just the Medicaid, the collateral issues related to the reclassification, redetermination of those. As many folks know, that since the pandemic, there has not been a reclassification period, so that we can make sure that the roles accurately reflect who is and is not eligible. We know that we do not have the resources to totally backfill where the federal government has been in supporting the expanded Medicaid roles, but we do have resources to help people through the transition. And I think that's what we're going to be focused on, and looking to the Secretary to help design a plan that we can put legislative framework in place.
This is sort of connected to that, and then you've repeatedly talked about how you're going to prioritize mental health care. This connects with guns. Is there any initiative to supplement the shortage of providers?
Yes, absolutely. So Senator Augustine, our President Pro Tem, has a workforce bill about how do we increase the number of providers in the mental health care space. This is both physical health and mental health. We know that there is a massive shortage. The good news is the increased discussion and the increased reduction in stigma around mental health has led to a lot more younger people being interested in getting into mental health careers. And so those institutions, University of Maryland and others that have programs, Towson, have mentioned that there has just been this uptick of those who want to serve in the mental health field. We have to look at the whole process and the whole funnel, because one of the challenges is it takes a very, very long time for somebody to be interested, enter a program, and then to be able to serve patients. And so we have to make sure that the barriers in place, a lot of them make sense. You want somebody to have the right education. They're treating somebody's mental health issues. But if it takes 6 years and we lose so many folks in the pipeline, there's opportunities to make changes along the way. And that's part of what I think Senator Augustine is trying to get towards, as well as the cost of education. And so trying to make sure that we have scholarships and can help people to bear the burden of the cost to get into the field.
Mental health is historically a Republican talking point when it comes to the gun conversation. What do conversations with Republicans in the legislature look like about that, and when it comes to potentially limiting access to firearms?
We in Maryland have passed the red flag law, which I think is a really very, very important. I believe we did that on a bipartisan basis. I think that there were some Republicans in the Senate who joined us on that initiative. I think there is a general set. I don't think it's an either or. I think that's the most important. We can work on both mental health access and making sure that there is real firearm safety and not spreading firearms across our communities. This is a both and conversation, not an either or. And I think oftentimes what happens when we start to talk about mental health in relation to gun violence, it is posited as either you do deal with mental health or you deal with regulations regarding firearms. It is both and.
Chair Smith, go ahead.
President Brusen, sorry. So not only did Bruen extinguish the good and reasonable cause, it also put into question Maryland's ban on assault weapons. So who in the legislature is keeping an eye on that and preparing for the Fourth Circuit's decision?
Yeah, well, I mean, really, it is our Attorney General, our counsel in the Attorney General's office that has been monitoring this closely. Obviously, we have legislators who are looking at firearms regulations every day. We do rely heavily on our Attorney General's office to help guide where the likely opinions may be and may be coming out. And so, there are chances that circuits put out opinions today. The Supreme Court doesn't have an assault weapon ban issue in front of it currently. I do think that in the Bruen decision, it was a concurrence opinion. There were two other concurrence opinions. And so while the holding was a majority opinion, the rationale that all regulations have to track back to the 18th century, that was the opinion in the held, that was the holding in the held opinion, or the one that had the majority votes, but there were two concurrences that got those votes there, and they had a different approach. So this is why it's so gray and why we rely so heavily on our Attorney General is that I think it's what circuit courts are doing right now is trying to interpret it the right way, and we're going to see divisions in circuits of how they move forward. I mean, in my mind, the assault weapons ban is a non-starter. It is absolutely essential. This is, I don't understand why someone needs a weapon of war in their home. I just don't. And I know that there are gun enthusiasts, but I have never understood. It is just something I don't understand it. And so, as we move forward about interpreting Bruen and how cases, it is a priority for me that we uphold and make sure that those, and it's including things like expanded magazines and 30-round, I just can't fathom a world where you need 30 bullets in a magazine to protect your home, or now at this point conceivably carry a concealed weapon. It doesn't, I think most Marylanders agree that this is not the type of world they want to live in.
Mr. President, yesterday you provided some statistics to the body on bills introduced, et cetera, and then this morning you're saying that 857 had been introduced?
I think we were at 879,
Oh,
18.7 bills per senator.
okay. So that kind of goes to my point. I know this may have come up before. Is there a discussion underway that would put a cap on how many bills a senator can introduce? And wouldn't that kind of stifle their First Amendment right?
So we do have a cap currently in the Senate. The House does not. We do in the Senate. So we have a cap of 25 bills and 30 requests. And so there's 5 bonus bills that are permitted when somebody requests those bills during the interim, so that there's a spread out time, and so they can get up to 30. But we're at an average of 18. This is a conversation that we're probably going to have in this upcoming interim is whether or not we need to reevaluate that number and make it lower. Time is the most difficult and challenging aspect of session. And the work is becoming ever more complicated and complex. And so for committees who at the moment, are spending 5, 6, JPR was here on Tuesday night, I believe it was Tuesday night, until 12:15. The next night they were here until 8 o'clock. That's just for bill hearings. When you start talking about amendments and really evaluating the impacts of bills, from my perspective, you don't evaluate what goes right with a bill. That's not what the best legislators should do. We all know what goes right. That's why somebody introduces the bill. The question is what could go wrong, and you have to evaluate the unanticipated consequences, and that takes time. You've got to really talk it through. You've got to hear from advocates and assess what is the potential impact that we haven't thought of yet. And for committees to do that well, they have to really be working collaboratively together. And in a 90-day session, it is very, very difficult to do that for 879 bills. So, I think that this is something that we're going to look at for this term. We do have a single subject issue, so there are some states that have very low caps. In Colorado, I believe that each legislator only gets 5 bills. And there's some exceptions here and there, but they get 5 bills per session. They have a little bit more, a little looser single subject rule, but still, there are other models that I think that we should always be looking towards to see, making sure that our system is the best possible for Marylanders.
I won't ask you to name names, but how many lawmakers are up against the cap? And with 18.7, that suggests at least some lawmakers
Well, I have 3.
are right on that cap. So how many lawmakers are pushing up against that 25-30 cap?
I don't know the exact number. We have several.
More than a half dozen, more than a dozen?
I have to get back to you. I think we're probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 to 8 are probably at the cap. And it's hard to tell because there are bills that don't count against the senator if they're of request or by request. So if somebody is a delegation chair, the bills that are requested through the delegation don't count towards that senator's individual total. So there could be some that have a more than an aggregate of 25, but it was an effort to try and have some limit on the time that is used for bills that are introduced on time.
Can we talk about the upcoming executive nominations committee meeting and how the conversation might go with the transportation secretary, for example?
Sure. So we have 10. We're joined here by our executive nominations chairperson, who is with us this morning and has been doing a wonderful job in her new role as chair of executive nominations with a lot of nominees. I think that we will hear from the remaining 10 that have been named. The chair mentioned yesterday that we're going to flip the order. So Last time we went a little bit longer because we had the secretaries at the front and then other individuals who had to wait all the way through that. I think we'll switch the order this time and do the other non-secretaries first and do the secretaries on the back end. I know that there are some real questions for folks, but the secretaries have done a great job so far meeting with senators and sitting down to talk through questions and concerns. And I don't foresee any no major red flags have been risen to my knowledge yet.
There's always a lot of discussion about diversity among cabinet appointments, and Republicans on Monday took a line of questioning, asking a lot of questions about rural Maryland, especially as it relates to agriculture and water issues. Afterwards, they suggested that one of the problems that they saw was a lack of diversity in terms of regional diversity, that none of the cabinet secretaries they interviewed were from rural areas or had familiarity with rural areas. Is there enough geographic diversity in these cabinet picks?
Look, I think so far of the I believe it's 18 of the 20 secretaries, a number of them have come from out of state. And so it's hard to assess. I think that you want to look at somebody's talent, not necessarily where they live. Somebody can very much represent effectively rural and urban areas. It is not just because you live somewhere that is you have the exclusive claim one way or the other. Now, may you be more familiar, may it be more regular? Of course. And I would say that I would certainly agree with my colleagues who believe that it is as important that their areas of the state, which may be of a different political party in the majority, that they have the same right to be represented well as anyone else. And so I think the administration has done a good job of trying to look for the most talented individuals and not necessarily just look at where they are from. But I do know, I think later today, I'm meeting with Mayor Jake Day, who's on the Eastern Shore and has been the mayor of Salisbury and now is moving into, is the acting secretary of DHCD. I think that there is an effort being made as to the degree feasible to make sure that the diversity of the cabinet reflects the diversity of the state. It will never be perfect because there are a lot of factors to balance, be it geography, race, diversity of thought, political party. And so, there's always going to be something that may feel off kilter because another value is being covered. And so I think I feel very good about where the Moore administration is with their appointees right now. And but I would encourage my colleagues in rural areas to engage with the administration. I think it's an important point that, as senators, we all represent the state, and they should make sure to make their opinions known to the administration, because I know that the administration does care about what they have to say.
Possible, Mr. President. Go ahead. Thank you. Mr. President, touch on diversity a little bit, what Brian had. Go to education. You know about education very well. You know about the push in the blueprint to hire diverse teachers, but of course there's been reports and data. The Department of Education has shown there's a lack of diversity in the classroom. And part of the blueprint will highlight to recruit more diverse teachers in the classroom. Will you use your bully pulpit to ensure that happens, especially being that that's been one of the Legislative Black Caucus's main priorities? And also advocates have said Maryland's not doing enough. What do you see should be done?
Without a doubt, this is an important priority, and I just met with the Black Caucus earlier this week, and it is one of their top priority areas, is making sure that the diversity in the classrooms of our state's classroom represents the diversity of our state. We're not there yet. We're not there yet. It doesn't mean there haven't been good efforts attempted, but we're not there. And I will say this has been exacerbated because of the pandemic and the fact that teachers, educators, paraprofessionals, anyone in a school building right now is exhausted. And we've seen a great deal of attrition and a difficulty in recruitment and retention of teachers writ large, particularly teachers of color. And so there are some promising examples. One of the best programs I've seen was actually out of Clemson, which was a program really highlighting how to get Black males into the classroom. Call Me Mister is the name of the initiative. There was a change in the legislature, I've heard, and it has since been defunded, even though the data was very, very strong about at Clemson getting men of color to both into the profession for education side and then to stay in the profession overall with mentors and mentees. And we're having incredibly positive impacts on the outcomes for students, for particularly Black students. And so I think, if we want our school system to be the best and brightest, we have to have teachers that reflect the student body. And so it is a core priority that is harder post-pandemic, but still at the top of the list, and we have to continuously press.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great, great weekend. Stay safe.